The morning started like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across the streets, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and coffee from nearby houses. The twins were already up, moving with a rhythm that seemed almost synchronized, though no one could tell it at first glance. One of them was in the kitchen, carefully preparing breakfast, while the other jogged around the block, his movements smooth and controlled, like a dance he had done 1,000 times before. To anyone who saw them, they looked like ordinary young men living ordinary lives. Inside the kitchen, the twin who was cooking hummed a soft tune, cracking eggs and pouring cereal with precise, deliberate motions. He glanced at the clock and then at the window, making a mental note of the time. Outside, the other twin returned from his jog, wiping sweat from his forehead, his expression calm, almost serene. They shared a brief look, a quiet understanding passing between them without words. It was one of those small gestures that made them seem perfectly ordinary, yet there was something about the way they carried themselves that suggested there was more beneath the surface. After breakfast, they got ready for the day. Their clothing was casual, comfortable jeans, t-shirts, sneakers. But even in these simple outfits, they carried themselves with an air of discipline. It wasn't arrogance, but a subtle confidence, a quiet alertness that came from years of rigorous training and experiences most people could never imagine. Despite this, they blended into the neighborhood effortlessly. They greeted their neighbors with warm smiles and friendly waves, and people responded in kind, unaware that behind those calm expressions were minds and bodies honed to perfection. The twins decided to take a short walk through the local park before starting their day. The park was alive with the sounds of children laughing, dogs barking, and birds chirping. They moved in sync, scanning their surroundings with the kind of attention most people reserved for video games or action movies. They smiled at a few familiar faces along the way, exchanged small talk, and even stopped to help an elderly neighbor carry a bag of groceries. It was an ordinary scene, the kind that made the neighborhood feel safe and welcoming. But even as they helped the neighbor, there was a subtle tension in their posture, a readiness that hinted at capabilities far beyond what anyone could guess. As they continued through the park, their conversation was light and playful. They joked about plans for the weekend, debated which coffee shop had the best drinks, and laughed at small shared memories from their childhood. Yet despite the laughter, there was a precision in their speech and a quiet focus in their movements. One would point out something in the distance, and the other would respond instantly, anticipating the thought before it was spoken. It was a small but telling detail, one that suggested their minds worked in ways ordinary people could not easily understand. The twins' life in the neighborhood was simple, but structured. They lived modestly, in a house that blended into the street with neat gardens and freshly painted walls. Inside, the home was tidy and organized, reflecting their disciplined personalities. Each item had its place, each task its time. They cooked, cleaned, and exercised with care, making the mundane feel almost purposeful. But every so often, the routine was punctuated by moments that revealed their extraordinary past. A glimpse of a scar, a quick reflex in catching a falling object, or a calm reaction to a sudden noise hinted at experiences far beyond what neighbors could imagine. Despite their outward calm, the twins were not immune to the subtle tensions in the neighborhood. There had been murmurs, a few whispered comments, and some curious glances from a small group of people who did not understand them. Some of the whispers carried undertones of dislike or prejudice, though it had not yet escalated into anything overtly dangerous. The twins noticed, of course. They always noticed. But they chose to ignore it, not out of fear, but because they understood the value of patience and observation. They had learned long ago that true power did not need to be displayed at all times. On this particular morning, as they walked through the park, they spotted a few members of a local gang lingering near the edge of the playground. The twins slowed their pace, noting the body language, the expressions, the way the group subtly shifted when they entered the area. The gang members looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and contempt, but the twins' calm demeanor did not falter. They exchanged a brief glance, a silent communication that was almost imperceptible to anyone else. The twins continued their walk, their steps measured and unhurried. But there was a quiet tension in the air that neither side ignored. The twins' past experiences had taught them to remain alert in situations like this. Though the neighborhood seemed peaceful, they knew how quickly things could escalate. Their training had instilled in them the ability to assess threats in an instant, to react with precision, and to maintain control even under extreme pressure. They carried that knowledge like a silent shield, invisible to the world but always ready. Yet they also carried something else, a sense of humanity, a desire to live quietly and positively despite knowing what they were capable of. After their walk, they returned home and went about their separate routines. One twin settled at the kitchen table with a laptop, reviewing some work and checking emails. His movements were efficient, almost methodical, and his focus was intense, but there was also a calmness that made the scene feel natural. The other twin headed to the garage where he maintained some exercise equipment and trained in silence. His movements were precise, powerful, and fluid, yet there was a grace to them that suggested this was as much art as it was training. Throughout the morning, they interacted with neighbors and friends in ways that emphasized their human side. They helped a child retrieve a fallen kite, stopped to chat with a local shopkeeper about a new delivery, and even offered a cup of coffee to someone struggling to carry groceries. These small acts of kindness contrasted sharply with the hidden intensity of their capabilities, making the twins feel both relatable and mysterious at the same time. By midday, the atmosphere in the neighborhood remained calm, but a sense of anticipation lingered. The gang members observed the twins from a distance, unaware of what they were truly capable of. They made casual threats, whispered insults, and tried to provoke reactions, but the twins remained composed. It was almost like a game of chess, with each side carefully watching the other, unaware of the skill and strategy in play. As the sun climbed higher, the twins paused to rest under the shade of a large oak tree. They drank water, wiped sweat from their foreheads, and exchanged a few words. The conversation was casual, but beneath the surface there was strategy, planning, and awareness. They discussed minor neighborhood issues, joked about mundane problems, and shared light-hearted stories from their childhood. Yet in every action, there was an underlying readiness, a preparedness that no casual observer could detect. In these moments, the twins' humanity shone through most clearly. They were not defined by their past or their training. They were defined by their choices, their compassion, and their ability to remain grounded in a world that often demanded harshness. They laughed at each other's jokes, offered encouragement to passers-by, and even took time to reflect silently, enjoying the simple pleasures of a calm day. By the end of the morning, it was clear to anyone paying attention that these were not ordinary men. The twins carried themselves with a quiet authority, a sense of control, and a calm confidence that set them apart. Yet they were approachable, kind, and deeply human. They moved through their neighborhood with a balance of strength and gentleness, blending ordinary life with extraordinary capability. As they headed back home, the twins walked side by side, scanning their surroundings, greeting neighbors, and enjoying the warm sunlight on their faces. The stage was set for the challenges ahead, though no one in the neighborhood could yet guess what was coming. To everyone else, it was just another morning. To the twins, it was a day that required attention, awareness, and the quiet readiness that came from years of preparation. The calm before the storm had never felt so alive. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. The twins had returned from their morning routines and settled into their usual rhythm, but something felt slightly off. There was a subtle tension in the air, almost like the calm before a storm. It wasn't anything that ordinary people would notice, but the twins' instincts picked up on it immediately. Their eyes flicked to the corners of the street, the bushes near the park, and the small alleyways where shadows lingered longer than they should. They were not wrong. A small group of local troublemakers had begun observing them more closely. At first it was just curiosity, the kind that made people stare a little too long, but it quickly turned into something more aggressive. The group whispered among themselves, casting glances at the twins with a mix of annoyance and something darker. They were unaware, of course, that the people they were watching were far from ordinary. The twins carried on with their day, but they did so with the kind of awareness that comes from years of training. Every sound, every movement in the neighborhood was noted, cataloged, and understood. They moved around their house with the same precision they used in the park earlier, opening doors carefully, checking corners, and listening to the faintest sounds outside. They didn't speak about it. There was no panic, only calm observation. Their neighbors would have thought it was just habit, a normal attention to detail, but the twins knew better. By mid-afternoon, the gang decided to act. A few members waited near the corner of the street, pretending to play basketball while keeping one eye on the twins' house. Others lurked near the small park where the twins often walked, trying to create an opportunity to intimidate them. The plan was crude, fueled by anger and prejudice, but to them it felt like power. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The twins noticed immediately. They were outside, taking care of some light yard work, trimming the bushes and sweeping the driveway. At first they ignored the gang's presence as if they were invisible, almost like shadows passing by in the background. But their eyes were sharp, their senses alert. They could tell exactly how many people were watching, how they were positioned, and what they might do next. Even in casual activity, they moved with precision, measuring distances, angles, and possibilities with the calm of people who had trained their minds to always anticipate danger. The gang decided to make their first move. One of them stepped closer, trying to block the driveway and shout a few insults. The twin who was trimming the bushes stopped and looked up, his expression calm, almost bored. He tilted his head slightly as if assessing the situation, and then continued his work. The gang member was confused. The twin didn't react with fear or anger. There was no sudden movement, no hint of aggression. It was as if nothing he had done mattered at all. The other twin noticed from the corner of his eye and silently moved closer, positioning himself so that the twins were side by side. There was no urgency, no sign of preparation, yet their bodies were ready, coiled like springs. The gang felt a moment of triumph, thinking that the twins were intimidated, that their presence was enough to assert dominance. But the calmness of the twins was deceptive. Every muscle, every thought was aligned with awareness and control. The gang tried again, stepping closer this time, more aggressive, shouting louder, and using gestures to provoke a reaction. The twins finally spoke, but their voices were calm, controlled, and steady. They didn't yell, they didn't threaten, and they didn't even raise their voices. They simply warned the group to move along in a tone that was polite yet firm. The words themselves were unremarkable, but the way they were delivered carried authority that made the gang pause. There was no anger in their tone, no desire to escalate, yet there was a quiet power that could not be ignored. For a moment, the gang members hesitated. They looked at each other, unsure what to do. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even a verbal argument that would escalate. Instead, they were met with calm, unshakable confidence. Some of them tried to push forward, thinking that bravado alone could break the twins' composure. Others stayed back, their confidence shaken by the twins' presence. The twins moved slightly, not aggressively, but in a way that subtly shifted the balance of the situation. One twin adjusted his stance, planting his feet firmly on the ground, while the other casually stepped closer. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to communicate readiness without hostility. The gang could feel the change, though they couldn't explain why. There was something in the twins' demeanor that said, without words, that this confrontation was not worth pursuing. Still, the gang wanted to test them further. A member picked up a small rock and tossed it near the twins' feet, a childish attempt to provoke fear or anger. The twins' reaction was precise and controlled. Without haste, one twin bent down and picked up the rock, holding it for a moment before placing it carefully on the ground. There was no threat, no aggression, just a quiet demonstration of awareness and restraint. The gang members for the first time began to feel uncertainty. They realized that these men were not ordinary, and that their attempts at intimidation might backfire. As the tension built, a neighbor stepped outside to see what was happening. The twins greeted him with a smile and a few friendly words, their attention still partially on the gang. The neighbor noticed the calm demeanor of the twins and remarked on how polite and friendly they were, despite the trouble nearby. It was a small reminder of the humanity that balanced their extraordinary abilities. They were disciplined, alert, and capable of extraordinary action, yet they were also kind, approachable, and human. The gang, frustrated by their inability to provoke a reaction, started to whisper among themselves. Their plans for intimidation were failing, and their confidence began to crack. One of them made a crude gesture, trying to insult the twins further, but it was clear they were losing control. The twins watched quietly, making no sudden movements, their expressions calm and unreadable. They were waiting, observing, and preparing for whatever came next. Time seemed to stretch as the gang struggled to maintain their sense of dominance. The twins' patience was unshakable. They didn't escalate, they didn't panic, and they didn't react in anger. Every word, every movement was calculated, measured, and deliberate. It was a lesson in control, a subtle demonstration of how power could exist without aggression. Finally, the gang decided to retreat, at least temporarily. They backed away slowly, casting wary glances over their shoulders. The twins didn't pursue them, didn't taunt them, and didn't even raise their voices. They simply returned to their tasks, trimming bushes and sweeping the driveway, their calmness a quiet but undeniable reminder of who was truly in control. After the gang left, the twins paused and shared a brief look, a silent communication that spoke volumes. It wasn't anger, pride, or even amusement, it was simply awareness. They had managed the situation without unnecessary conflict, demonstrating their discipline and restraint. Even in a moment of potential danger, they maintained their humanity, showing that strength was not about domination but about balance and control. As the afternoon wore on, they went inside and continued with their daily routines. One twin sat at the kitchen table, organizing papers and reviewing his work, while the other cleaned and maintained exercise equipment in the garage. Their movements were deliberate, efficient, and precise, yet there was a calm, human quality to everything they did. They laughed quietly at small jokes, shared a snack, and even paused to check on a neighbor who had dropped something on the sidewalk. The events of the day served as a reminder that the world outside could be unpredictable and sometimes hostile, but the twins had the tools, skills, and mindset to handle whatever came their way. They had faced challenges far greater than these, yet they never lost sight of their humanity. They could be formidable, but they chose to be compassionate, understanding, and disciplined. As the sun began to set, casting warm colors across the neighborhood, the twins stepped outside once more. They walked slowly, surveying the streets, noting the movements of people and the subtle shifts in the environment. There was no immediate threat, but they remained alert, knowing that vigilance was a habit, not a reaction. The neighborhood seemed calm again, but the twins were aware that the gang's presence had not disappeared entirely. It was a reminder that challenges often came in waves and that patience and preparation were just as important as strength. The evening passed peacefully, though the twins stayed attentive. They cooked dinner, shared stories, and reflected on the day, balancing ordinary life with extraordinary awareness. Their conversation was light, filled with small jokes and memories, but it carried the subtle undertone of strategy, observation, and experience. They had navigated the day successfully, maintaining calm and control, and ensuring that their actions reflected both their discipline and their humanity. As night fell, the neighborhood quieted down. The twins sat on the porch for a moment, enjoying the cool air and the soft glow of the streetlights. They spoke little, simply observing, reflecting, and preparing silently for what might come next. It was a quiet ending to a day filled with subtle tension, but for the twins, it was just another part of life, a life that balanced ordinary moments with extraordinary readiness, human warmth with formidable skill. The day after the tense encounter, the neighborhood seemed calm on the surface, but the twins knew better. They could feel it in the subtle shifts, the way some neighbors whispered quietly, the way the gang members glanced from windows and alleyways, and the faint tension lingering in the air. It was the calm before a storm, and they had learned long ago to read these signs, to anticipate events before they happened. The twins went about their morning routines with the same quiet discipline they always showed. One prepared breakfast while the other ran through a short, controlled exercise routine in the backyard. Their movements were natural and human, but underneath they were precise, deliberate, and practiced, reflecting years of elite training. While most people would see ordinary men preparing for their day, the twins were assessing, calculating, and preparing for any eventuality. By late morning, the gang's presence became harder to ignore. They lingered near the park, making crude comments and throwing sidelong glances at the twins' house. At first it was subtle, almost playful in a childish way, but the undertones of malice were clear. The twins noticed, of course, and this time they decided not to ignore it. They did not act aggressively, but they prepared mentally for what could come. Their calmness did not mask readiness, it highlighted it. Every movement, every glance, every gesture was controlled and intentional. That afternoon, the gang finally made their move. One of the younger members, emboldened by arrogance and ignorance, stepped onto the twins' property, shouting insults and waving his hands. The twins were outside tending to the garden, and at first they didn't react. They continued what they were doing, but their eyes followed every motion of the gang member. Their posture was relaxed, almost casual, but their bodies were ready. There was no fear, no hesitation, only alertness and control. The gang, thinking they could provoke a reaction, pushed further. Another member joined in, trying to intimidate the twins with more aggressive gestures. They stepped closer, blocking the driveway, shouting louder and acting as if the twins should be afraid. But the twins did not flinch. They did not argue. They simply continued their work, speaking only when necessary, and even then their voices were calm, controlled, and measured. Then, the situation escalated. One of the gang members picked up a nearby stick, swinging it carelessly, attempting to strike at one of the twins. In an instant, everything changed. The calm that had defined the twins' morning shattered the gang's assumptions. With fluid movements, one twin caught the stick mid-swing, holding it firmly without hurting the attacker. There was no aggression, no anger, only precision and control. The gang members froze, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The other twin moved subtly, positioning himself in a way that blocked any further advance. He did not charge, did not shout, did not strike, but his stance and expression conveyed that he was fully aware of every possible action the gang could take. In that moment, the gang began to realize the truth. These were not ordinary men, and their arrogance had placed them in grave danger. The confrontation escalated quickly after that. The twins moved in perfect synchronization, neutralizing threats without causing lasting harm. They disarmed the stick-wielding member, gently but firmly guiding him to the ground. When another member attempted to rush forward, he was intercepted with a controlled maneuver that left him off balance and unable to continue. Every action the twins took was calculated, precise, and purposeful. They did not strike with cruelty, nor did they act recklessly. Their training was evident, but so was their restraint. Neighbors began to notice the commotion and stepped outside, drawn by the sounds of shouting and movement. The twins maintained calm in front of the onlookers, demonstrating control even as chaos surrounded them. Their faces were serene, their actions deliberate. To anyone watching, it was clear that the twins were in command of the situation. There was no panic, no recklessness, only an impressive display of skill and composure. The gang, now fully aware that they were outmatched, tried to flee. But the twins allowed them only limited retreat, ensuring that they could escape without causing more harm, yet unable to act further against the twins. Every move was controlled. Every option was considered. The gang members scrambled, some tripping over their own feet, others retreating in shock and fear. They had never expected resistance like this, and certainly not from men who had seemed so ordinary just hours earlier. When the last of the gang members ran off, the twins paused and shared a brief look, communicating silently. There was no pride, no anger, no gloating. It was simply acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that they had managed a dangerous situation without unnecessary violence. The neighborhood, though shaken, began to settle down again. People whispered to each other, some awestruck, some confused, trying to understand what had happened. The twins, meanwhile, returned to their tasks as if nothing had occurred. They pruned flowers, swept the driveway, and went about their day, calm and composed. Later, as the twins reflected on the incident, they spoke quietly to each other. Their conversation was not about anger or revenge, but about awareness, preparation, and strategy. They analyzed the gang's behavior, discussed how they could prevent future encounters, and considered ways to maintain peace in the neighborhood without compromising their values. Even in reflection, their humanity shone through. They were capable of extraordinary force, yet they valued control, compassion, and careful judgment above all else. That evening, they decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, as they often did. The air was cooler now, and the streets were quieter. They greeted neighbors who had gathered outside, offering smiles and calm reassurances. The twins' presence had shifted the neighborhood dynamic subtly. People who had been wary now felt a sense of safety, and even those who had been judgmental or hostile began to reconsider their assumptions. The twins' actions had demonstrated that strength did not need to be aggressive, that courage could coexist with kindness, and that discipline and humanity were not mutually exclusive. As they walked, The twins noticed the gang members lingering at a distance, still emboldened by the anonymity of shadows. The twins did not confront them, did not shout, and did not act aggressively. They simply observed, aware and ready, communicating silently to each other. Their bodies were relaxed, their movements fluid, but every muscle was prepared for action if necessary. The gang, aware that they had been bested earlier, kept their distance, unsure whether to attempt anything further. The twins' calm vigilance was enough to maintain order. Returning home, the twins resumed their daily routines. They cooked dinner, shared stories, and laughed quietly about minor events from earlier in the day. Despite the intensity of the afternoon, they chose to focus on ordinary life, on simple pleasures, and on human connection. They were not defined by their abilities nor by the threats they faced. They were defined by their choices, their kindness, and their discipline. Even after a confrontation, they remained grounded, calm, and approachable. Before going to bed, they took a moment to sit on the porch, looking at the quiet streets and the stars beginning to appear above. They reflected on the day, on the balance between ordinary life and extraordinary ability, on the responsibility that came with their skills. They did not speak of pride or ego. They spoke of awareness, patience, and the importance of maintaining humanity even in situations that demanded strength. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, the calm after a storm, and a reminder that life was not just about conflict but about compassion, balance, and integrity. The twins had faced the first real challenge from the gang and had handled it perfectly. They had demonstrated extraordinary skill, yet they had also maintained control, restraint, and empathy. Their neighbors, whether they understood it or not, had witnessed something remarkable, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that ordinary men could possess extraordinary abilities, and that true strength was measured not just by action, but by restraint and humanity. As they prepared for sleep, the twins were aware that this was only the beginning. The gang's presence was not fully eliminated, and the world beyond the quiet streets held its own challenges. But the twins had the experience, the skill, and the wisdom to handle whatever came next. They understood that life was a balance between vigilance and calm, between power and compassion. And as they closed their eyes, they did so with the quiet confidence of men who knew they could face any storm without losing themselves. The morning after the confrontation, the neighborhood had a different energy. People moved more cautiously, glancing over their shoulders, whispering to each other about the events of the previous day. The twins, however, seemed unaffected. They went about their routines with the same calm discipline, as if nothing had changed. Yet beneath their calm exterior, they were aware of the lingering tension, ready to respond if needed. One of the twins stepped outside first, tending to the small garden in front of the house. The soil was damp from overnight rain and the air carried a fresh, earthy scent. As he worked, he noticed neighbors peeking from their windows or stepping cautiously onto their porches. He smiled politely, waving at those who greeted him. There was no threat in his demeanor, only quiet confidence. The other twin joined him shortly after, carrying a small toolbox to fix a broken fence post near the driveway. Together they worked side by side, their movements synchronized, efficient, and calm. Despite the calmness, the twins were fully aware of their surroundings. The gang members who had confronted them the day before had not disappeared. Some lingered in the distance, pretending to be busy with their own business while keeping a careful eye on the twins. Others stayed hidden, watching from alleyways or behind parked cars. The twins noticed every subtle movement, every shift in posture, every glance directed their way. They did not react aggressively, but they were prepared, and their awareness alone was enough to deter any impulsive actions from the gang. By mid-morning, a few neighbors gathered outside, drawn by curiosity and concern. They spoke quietly among themselves, speculating about the confrontation and its aftermath. The twins, as they moved about their work, greeted each person with warmth and kindness. They answered questions politely, reassured those who were worried, and even shared a few light-hearted jokes. Their humanity and approachability were in sharp contrast to the tension in the air, and slowly people began to relax in their presence. The gang, frustrated by their inability to intimidate the twins further, decided to escalate their efforts in small indirect ways. They vandalized a fence in the neighborhood, hoping to provoke anger, and left threatening messages on walls. But the twins remained calm. They repaired the fence carefully, cleaning up the messages with deliberate attention. There was no anger, no retaliation, only quiet resolve. They knew that escalating conflict would achieve nothing, and they understood the importance of maintaining their integrity and composure. In the afternoon, the twins took a walk through the neighborhood. Their presence was noticeable but not alarming. People nodded respectfully as they passed, and even those who had been wary before seemed to feel a sense of reassurance. The twins stopped at a small corner store, greeting the owner warmly and chatting briefly about everyday matters. It was an ordinary interaction, but it reinforced the twins' connection to the community. They were not just skilled or disciplined. They were part of the human fabric of the neighborhood. As they walked back home, they noticed a few members of the gang lingering near the park again. The gang tried to act casual, but their nervous glances betrayed their unease. The twins did not approach them aggressively. Instead, they walked with a relaxed posture, keeping their awareness sharp. The gang's attempts to provoke them were futile. The twins' calm confidence made any hostile action seem both pointless and risky. The gang members, realizing they were being observed and understood, gradually dispersed, muttering to each other. Back at home, the twins reflected on the events and their impact. They spoke quietly to each other, discussing the importance of patience, awareness, and restraint. They did not speak of anger or revenge, but of maintaining balance, protecting themselves, and fostering peace in the neighborhood. Their conversation was a reminder that strength alone was not enough. Wisdom and humanity were equally important. They understood that their abilities were powerful, but they chose to use them responsibly only when necessary, and always with consideration for others. As the evening approached, the neighborhood began to settle. Children played quietly in the yards. Neighbors chatted in small groups, and the street seemed calm once more. The twins, observing this, felt a sense of satisfaction. They had managed a dangerous situation without causing harm beyond what was necessary, and they had maintained their connection to the community. Their actions had not only ensured safety, but had also demonstrated that courage and discipline could coexist with kindness and empathy. That night, the twins decided to take a longer walk through the streets, enjoying the quiet and reflecting on the day. The air was cool, and the streetlights cast soft glows on the pavement. They greeted a few late-night neighbors, offered help to someone struggling with groceries, and even stopped to check on a small stray dog that had wandered into the street. Their presence was calming, almost reassuring, a reminder that even extraordinary skill could be paired with ordinary acts of kindness. During this walk, they noticed subtle changes in the gang's behavior. The members were keeping their distance, whispering among themselves, and no longer trying to provoke confrontation. The twins' calm strength had communicated a clear message. Aggression would not succeed, and patience and composure were more powerful than rash action. It was a silent lesson, one that extended beyond physical ability to character, discipline, and moral clarity. Returning home, the twins resumed their routines. One prepared a simple meal while the other reviewed some personal plans for the upcoming days. Their actions were deliberate, calm, and human, but their awareness remained sharp. They understood that safety and peace were maintained not by chance, but by vigilance and thoughtful action. Every small gesture, every decision, was part of a larger pattern of balance between ordinary life and extraordinary capability. Later, as the night deepened, the twins sat on the porch reflecting quietly. The stars above seemed to twinkle with a gentle reassurance, and the sounds of the neighborhood were soft and steady. They spoke little, simply observing and reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Their minds were sharp, their skills intact, but they also cherished the ordinary moments, the quiet, the peace, and the connections with the people around them. It was a delicate balance, one they had mastered over years of experience. Through it all, their humanity was evident. They were capable of great strength, trained to face danger and handle extreme situations. Yet they chose compassion, patience, and understanding. They helped neighbors, protected their community, and maintained their own sense of calm and balance. Their actions demonstrated that true strength was not measured by dominance or fear, but by the ability to act with integrity, even in the face of threats. By the end of the evening, the twins felt a quiet satisfaction. They had managed the gang's aggression without escalating conflict, protected themselves and their neighborhood, and maintained their own humanity throughout. The streets were calm, the neighbors reassured, and the neighborhood seemed more harmonious than it had in days. It was a small victory, not one of force or aggression, but of awareness, patience, and careful action. As they prepared for bed, the twins knew that life in the neighborhood would continue, with its small challenges and unexpected events. But they were ready. They had shown that courage could be paired with kindness, that discipline could coexist with empathy, and that even ordinary acts of daily life could reflect extraordinary strength. They were ordinary to most eyes, extraordinary to those who understood, and perfectly balanced in the life they had chosen. The calm of the night wrapped around the neighborhood like a blanket. The twins, sitting quietly for a few final moments on the porch, watched the gentle flicker of streetlights and listened to the distant sounds of the city beyond. They did not speak of power or past achievements, only of the quiet satisfaction of having maintained peace, order, and humanity. Their eyes reflected a deep understanding that true strength was measured not by force alone, but by restraint, care, and wisdom. And as they finally went inside to sleep, the twins carried with them the quiet knowledge that they had faced danger, protected their community, and remained true to themselves. It was a calm night, but beneath the surface, there was readiness. A readiness for whatever challenges might come next, balanced with a deep respect for life, community, and the ordinary moments that made life meaningful. The morning after the events of the past days dawned quiet and calm, as if the neighborhood itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The streets were still, the air crisp, and the sunlight streamed through the trees with a gentle warmth. The twins were up early, as they always were, moving through their routines with the calm precision that had become part of their daily life. They tended to small chores, shared breakfast, and spoke quietly to each other about the day ahead. Though the gang had not made another direct move, the twins remained aware, their senses quietly observing the rhythm of the neighborhood. By mid-morning, neighbors began to come outside, some smiling nervously, some curious, and others openly thankful. News of the twins' handling of the gang had spread quickly, and people were beginning to see them in a new light. What had once been quiet admiration or casual curiosity had transformed into respect. The twins greeted everyone warmly, asking about their day and offering help where needed. One elderly neighbor struggled with a fallen gate latch, and one twin knelt beside him, carefully fixing it while the other offered words of encouragement and small talk. Their actions were ordinary, kind, and human, yet every gesture reflected discipline and awareness. Later, as the afternoon approached, the twins noticed a few of the gang members lingering on the edge of the neighborhood, watching from a distance. They had not caused harm recently, but it was clear they were still uneasy, uncertain whether to act or retreat. The twins did not confront them directly. Instead, they allowed their presence and quiet confidence to speak for itself. Every glance, every casual step, every calm gesture communicated readiness and awareness. The gang members, sensing this, hesitated and eventually dispersed, muttering in frustration. The twins had won without unnecessary confrontation, demonstrating control, strategy, and restraint. The day continued with a rhythm of normal life, yet there was a subtle shift in the neighborhood. People who had been fearful began to feel safer, and those who had been skeptical began to acknowledge the twins' presence as positive rather than threatening. Children played more freely in yards, neighbors chatted openly in the streets, and the overall sense of community strengthened. The twins, moving quietly among them, reinforced this sense without seeking attention. They carried themselves with calm confidence, blending extraordinary skill with everyday kindness, showing that heroism could exist in gentle human ways. In the late afternoon, a small commotion drew their attention. One of the younger neighbors had accidentally fallen from a bike, scraping a knee. The twins rushed over, moving quickly but carefully, assessing the situation. One knelt to clean the wound while the other fetched a first aid kit. They reassured the child with calm words and careful attention, making sure the injury was treated properly. This act of care, simple yet deeply human, contrasted with the perception some had of them as untouchable or intimidating. It reminded the community that the twins' strength was not just physical, but moral and compassionate as well. As evening fell, the twins walked through the neighborhood together, taking stock of the surroundings and greeting anyone they met. Their eyes were alert but not tense, scanning subtly for potential threats while maintaining a relaxed, approachable demeanor. They noticed subtle changes, a neighbor adjusting a broken fence, another sweeping leaves from the sidewalk. children playing safely in the yards. Life had returned to its natural rhythm, and the twins had played a role in restoring that peace without ever creating fear. The gang had largely disappeared, but their influence lingered in small, indirect ways. Some of the neighbors still spoke cautiously of them, some avoided certain streets, and a few whispered to each other in fear or mistrust. The twins recognized these patterns, and instead of reacting with aggression or punishment, they focused on reinforcing positivity and safety. They stopped to help a neighbor carry groceries, guided a lost dog back to its home, and even shared a light meal with a few families who had been affected by the gang's previous intimidation. Their actions reinforced the message that courage and discipline could coexist with kindness, and that leadership did not require force or dominance. Night fell over the neighborhood, bringing with it a quiet calm. Streetlights flickered on, casting soft golden glows across the sidewalks and trees. The twins sat on their porch observing the streets and reflecting on the events of the past days. Their conversation was quiet, measured, and thoughtful. They spoke about vigilance, patience, and the importance of maintaining balance in both life and action. They also spoke of humanity, the responsibility to act with care, the value of compassion, and the necessity of protecting the community without resorting to unnecessary force. Even in these quiet moments, their extraordinary skills were evident. They were calm, but their awareness extended to every detail of the neighborhood. The soft creak of a gate, the distant sound of a car, the movement of leaves in the wind. Their minds were trained to notice, analyze, and prepare, yet they chose to act only when necessary. This restraint was part of what made them remarkable. They could respond to danger with unmatched skill, but they preferred observation, compassion, and human connection whenever possible. Later, as the night deepened, a few neighbors walked by, greeting the twins with smiles and words of thanks. Some expressed curiosity about the events with the gang, while others simply wanted to express relief that the neighborhood felt safe again. The twins responded calmly with warmth and humility. They did not boast of their actions, nor did they dwell on the danger they had faced. Instead, they focused on reassurance, community, and human connection. Their presence became a symbol of quiet strength and integrity, and the neighborhood began to trust in that example. As the hours passed, the twins reflected individually and together on what had transpired. They understood that life was a balance between ordinary moments and extraordinary capability. The past few days had tested that balance, yet they had managed to maintain it. They had faced threats, protected others, and upheld their own principles. Their actions demonstrated that strength without compassion was hollow, and that heroism could exist in the form of patience, kindness, and careful action. The night was calm, but the twins remained subtly aware. Their senses remained alert, not out of fear but out of responsibility. They knew that challenges could arise at any time, and that true preparedness meant being ready while maintaining humanity. They did not need to act aggressively. Their mere awareness and presence were enough to deter potential threats. This balance of skill, awareness, and compassion defined who they were and how they interacted with the world. In the quiet moments before sleep, the twins helped a neighbor fix a small electrical problem, demonstrating practical skill alongside empathy. They listened to concerns, offered advice, and worked patiently until the issue was resolved. It was a simple act, yet it reflected their philosophy. Help when you can, protect when necessary, and always act with integrity. Their community began to see this pattern, slowly building trust and respect for the twins not because of fear, but because of the consistent demonstration of care and competence. Finally, as the night deepened, the twins returned to their home. They went through their usual routine, checking locks, tidying up, and preparing for sleep. Every action was deliberate, calm, and human, yet layered with awareness and readiness. They spoke briefly of plans for the next day, for their own personal training, and for ways to support their neighbors. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic action. Their lives, in their quiet precision, were already extraordinary. The neighborhood slept peacefully, the streets calm and quiet under the soft glow of streetlights. The twins reflected on the past events and the journey that had brought them here. They had faced threats, protected their community, and maintained their own humanity throughout. They had demonstrated that strength could be paired with kindness, that discipline could coexist with compassion, and that ordinary life could be lived with extraordinary awareness. As they finally lay down to rest, the twins felt a quiet satisfaction. They had faced danger and uncertainty, yet they had emerged with integrity intact. They had protected their neighbors, restored peace, and reinforced the sense of community. Their actions had shown that true strength is measured not by force alone, but by restraint, understanding, and empathy. Even ordinary moments, the calm morning, the walk through the streets, the helping hand, carried extraordinary meaning when guided by such principles. The night was calm, the neighborhood safe, and the twins ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. They slept with the quiet confidence of men who knew that strength was not just physical, that heroism could exist in restraint and care, and that human connection was just as important as skill or training. Theirs was a life that balanced extraordinary capability with ordinary humanity, leaving the community safer, stronger, and more united than before.